Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host Sam Nita, full-time British basketball advocate. Happy New Year. I hope you all had a good Christmas break and you're looking forward to everything that 2019 has to bring. I know that I certainly am. You're not going to believe this, but I actually messed up the audio again on this show. After just editing it, I realised that I didn't use the mic audio. I once again used the laptop audio. I think this one was actually recorded before the last one that we released around the Justin one, which we did the same thing with. So clearly there's a few little technical errors that I'm still ironing out. You can still hear it absolutely fine. Luckily, the guest speaks very loudly, but yeah, I am aware and I am working on it. So bear with me. It's very frustrating. Trust me. This week's show, we have Mark Dunning. Mark is a BBL coaching veteran, someone that used to be at the forefront of coach development in the UK through the Basketball Coaches Association. And you can clearly hear from this conversation just how passionate he is about it. But unfortunately, he is now completely checked out and is very, very sort of little involvement with the game, which is incredibly sad. And it does leave me asking questions about how that's happened. You know, he's a perfect example of one of these great resources that we have in the UK that unfortunately is not being used to help push the game forward. And so he needs to be involved. He should be involved. And I hope that that changes in the near future. Before we do get into the show, obviously a quick sponsorship message for our Patreon account. We've been growing our supporters on there recently, and we would love your support. We're coming directly to our audience, directly to you, to ask if you have £1, £2, £3, £5, £10 every single month that you'd be willing to donate to support us, to support our work, so that we can become 100% independent and financially sustainable, and dedicate even more time and resource to doing this, which is what we love, helping grow and promote British basketball and grow the British basketball media landscape. So if you go to patreon.com/hoopsfix, that's patreon.com/hoopsfix, you can sign up there, and if you have any questions, obviously you can drop me a line and I will happily answer them. But any support you can give us would be hugely appreciated. As always, if you're listening on iTunes, please do give us a rating and review. It goes a long way in helping spread the podcast far and wide. Same if you can screenshot it and put it on Instagram stories or Snapchat and help promote it and push it. It would be hugely appreciated, as we need all the support that we can get. And then finally, if you want some sort of private interaction rather than doing it publicly, you can email me, sam@hoopsfix.com. I'm open to all feedback at all times. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, please do leave a comment below. I reply to every single one. Would love to hear your feedback. Anyway, that is enough from me. Here is this week's show with me and Mark Dunning. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Obviously, there is a lot of stuff to cover, and there might be a lot of people that maybe haven't heard of you before. So if you were to meet someone and kind of introduce yourself and explain from a basketball standpoint your career, give us the brief sort of minute, 2 minutes of kind of what you've done, and then we'll go into detail on various bits as the conversation develops.
I got into basketball generally at school, like a lot of people did, and by accident in a way, and obviously developed a real love for the game as a player, and managed to have a couple of serendipitous moments through my school career, which we might get into later, might be of interest, which propelled me onto kind of bigger and better things in terms of junior National League basketball. And then having left school, caught the bug as a player, I went to college, teacher training college, to do a teaching degree, and there was basketball there. It was actually pretty successful. I went to St Mary's College in Twickenham, and in my final year, I became a player coach. Again, there was a serendipity about that, and there was a lot of links, if you like, between our college and Crystal Palace, as it was then, the perennial national champion. I think they, by that the point in history I'm talking about, they'd won maybe 8 in a row national championships. So again, we can get into that a bit later, because that really was the spark to my basketball career as well as my coaching career. And off of that, I managed to get a gig to start my coaching career as an assistant coach at Crystal Palace. So this is early 80s.
So in terms of the playing days, obviously, when you look back on your level as a player, how good were you? Was it a thing that you maybe just knew that you wanted to coach, or was the playing thing something that you pursued in the first place?
That's a good question, because obviously being vertically challenged, at school it didn't matter so much. I was one of those kids that, like a lot of kids, you did all the sports. So the migration into basketball was going to be seamless. And as I say, it was my school didn't do basketball. I went to an all-boys boarding school down in Hampshire, and it just so happened it was run by Salesian priests and brothers, and they're a global brotherhood. One of the priests had taught in America, I believe near Boston. He happened to come back to England to teach at our school, and obviously had been introduced to basketball in the States. There was no basketball in our place, and the PE teacher at the time probably wasn't going to introduce it, I don't know. So I think I'm in my second year of school now, year 8 as it's now known. And he went to the PE teacher and said, "Oh, do you want me to introduce basketball? I've done a little bit in this, blah, blah, blah." So there was a bunch of us that obviously went out, we did all the sports, and that's how, completely by accident, I got introduced as a player. Now, obviously being at boarding school, we had loads of time to practice, and he was there, obviously as a living priest, so he was coaching us. By the time I got to the sixth form at school, there was a few of us that were pretty good by then, and obviously we caught the bug. Plus, and you mentioned about, was there a sort of coaching element? Interestingly, the sixth form in those days, we seemed to have a lot more responsibility, if you like, and we became, the more responsible kids became a little bit of the sort of right-hand man of teachers. So basically, the PE teacher asked me to coach some of the younger teams, like the first and second years. So that was interesting in itself, but I was obviously still playing. And then the next bit of serendipity, my school was in Farnborough in Hampshire. Now, round the corner, literally from our school, was a sports shop by the name of Forsport. Now, older viewers and listeners will probably remember those days, because this was one of the first and only stores in the whole of the country that sold anything to do with basketball.
Wow. And
it was really,
what sort of year are we talking about?
We're talking 1971.
Okay.
By then.
Yeah.
You couldn't find any basketball gear in those days. You'd be lucky to get sort of a pair of Ruckernall canvas high tops. And again, the older people will remember that. So anyway, the point of this story is that the owner of that store was a guy called George Whitmore. Now, some of the old folk around the country listening and watching this will remember George. And we were in there all the time. There was about 4 or 5 of us that became junkies even at that point. So we were about 16, 17, going on 18 by the time we left school, obviously. And we were going in there, anything he would get, like new, and he started to then get some of the original, like Chuck Taylor's canvas, all colours. Then he started stocking the Dr. J model. There was only really Converse. Nike hasn't started. They started in 1972, as you probably know. And we would buy everything. And he was, by this time, supplying, other clubs around the country. And, of course, just mail order. There was no internet in those days. But here's the interesting thing. George, who was, by the way, an England and Great Britain international as a player, was also involved in the Army basketball.
Okay. Now,
Aldershot, as you probably know, is a huge army town, which was just down the road from Farnborough. Well, George ran a junior team. And we were just playing in a normal 60 by 40 box gym in those days. There was no sports halls. And he invited us to, these 3 or 4 buddies of mine and myself, to go along to his junior practices. And here we go, we enter this huge, I remember the name of the gym, it's called Fox Gym, in the Aldershot Garrison there. And it's a full-size court and we're like wooden floor. It was unbelievable. So that's when we got bitten big time. And of course, the level of play now that we were playing at went up, because we were just playing school basketball at that point.
Were you, was it very much a case of being only aware of the basketball that was taking place in the small pockets that you were playing, or did you have an idea of sort of the wider scene? Because I'm pretty sure, wasn't the National League started in 1972?
Yeah, it was around that time. Actually, yeah, a couple of years before that, I believe.
Okay.
Obviously, Crystal Palace, SCP as they were known in those days, they were one of the founder members, along with Brunel Uxbridge from the north and a couple of other teams I can't remember now.
Yeah.
I believe Avenue around this area, East London.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, but we weren't really aware of that so much because.
You were just focusing on playing.
Yeah, we were just like at school playing, doing all the sports. Obviously, trying to get our A-levels done as well in between basketball. So it was only through knowing George Whitmore and a couple of his associates that we kind of realised, oh, hang on a minute, there's a wider world of basketball out there. We want a piece of it. And again, my third bit of serendipity, and I won't use that word again. By the time we got to what was then the second year 6, so what would it be, 13 now?
Yeah.
We were obviously pretty good, and we managed to play some scrimmage games against some sort of older teams, one of them being the University of Surrey.
Okay.
Now, one of our players had left our school the year before, went to the University of Surrey. There's a little bit of the link. He knew that we were pretty good and could compete with them, just in friendly games, practice games and whatever. But here's the thing. We went over and played them over at Guildford a couple of times, and that's when I first met a gentleman by the name of Brian Naismith. Now, he'll feature in my story later on, but again, it's important, and I didn't know it at the time.
So from there, kind of at what point? I mean, I'm assuming you were still playing. Kind of at what point did it become about coaching? Kind of what happened with your playing to make you make the switch to coaching?
When I got to college, obviously the focus was on playing completely, and we had a pretty good team, as I say. And in fact, in my third year of 4,
so by college you mean university?
Yes, St Mary's College is now St Mary's University.
Yeah.
But in those days, you could qualify as a teacher in 3 years, and then you could do an extra year of a Bachelor of Education, BEd, which most of us did.
Right.
But in the third year, we actually won the British Colleges Championships, beating the then Great Britain coach, Vic Ambler, and his University of Exeter team.
Okay.
So that was a big win for us. And what happened next was the guy who was coaching us, who was a lecturer, left St Mary's to take up a professorship at the University of Leeds. We were left without a coach, but a really good team, a championship team. And we couldn't let it kind of break up. So the group got together and asked myself and another guy on the team, who's still a good friend of mine till today, would we want to coach the team? And we said yes, and that's when basically I started, quote unquote, proper coaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so at this point, was it still in terms of your knowledge? Because I'm fascinated by the kind of the state of the game, like the wider picture on a national stage. Obviously, I would assume with the university team, you probably did a bit of travelling up and down, but were there names back then that, even when you were at university, that you remember that people were talking about, of these were the top talents in the country that were coming through, the names or the players, kind of give us a lay of the land, of the scene in the UK at that point? Yeah,
what happened in those years, and just a quick reference for dates here. This would be 1975 through 1979.
Okay.
Those were my years there. Now, in that time, the National League was expanding and improving, but also, and there's a lot of people who can attest to this, I think, to this day, the London basketball scene was as good, sometimes better, than the National League. That's how good it was. And there was 3 main leagues: the London League, the Capital League, and the Middlesex League. those were the three top leagues with the best sort of competition and teams. So my horizons really were just in and around London. And because I wanted to play as much basketball as possible, I used to basically, jump on the tube and traipse around town literally to get a run anywhere and everywhere. And for example, you might have heard this I know you speak to a lot of people, North London College, which probably doesn't even exist anymore, a guy called Tom Payne, another old timer, used to have basically what we now know today as open gym. So there was always a run there. There was some really good players used to show out. So we used to go there. There was a run at Swiss Cottage, the old swimming baths down there. And I remember there was a court downstairs, and that was one of the old pools. So the floor was really springy. And we used to go down there and literally wherever. So I got to know kind of all the people involved in basketball around the London area. Refs, coaches, obviously players. And because now the college team, we were kind of limited. We wanted to play more games. So we basically would play as many kind of friendly games against these other teams from these other leagues until we eventually actually joined the Middlesex League ourselves to give us some more games as well as the college games. So whilst I was at college as well, and by the way, when I was sort of traipsing around, you kind of obviously make contacts with various people, and I managed to make contacts with the old LLSK team. Now, I don't know if you've come across them. Right, they became eventually the Embassy All-Stars, which then became Milton Keynes, and then they went defunct. But, back in those days, and I believe he's back on the scene now, Peter Sprogis was one of the, England's sort of top players. He was on that team, along with names like Stu Turpey, Mick Flanagan, Stu Earle, Dave Shelley. And I was going up against these guys, as a 5'8", that's generous, point guard who couldn't shoot, but I could really pass and play defence. That's what I always used to tell my players when they used to ask me, Coach, what type of player were you? That's what I always used to say. So those were great days. It was kind of raw, and I got to know these guys, and then, of course, would travel along to the Michael Sobel Sports Centre at the end of the Piccadilly line. I lived on the bottom of it, and there they were playing National League basketball. So and I knew these guys, and again, the London scene was really vibrant. A lot of good players coming through. The other sort of point of note here is that the Crystal Palace team were close to St Mary's, as I mentioned before, for various reasons. One of them being that their Americans at that time were Jimmy Guyman and Mark Sayers. They used to come, because, South London to Twickenham wasn't a big deal in those days. There wasn't as much traffic. To get an extra bit of training and everything in, they used to come and use our facilities at college, because obviously during the day, if there weren't lectures in there, it was empty.
Yeah.
So they used to be able to shoot around and work out in our gym. Well, of course, as I'm passing the sports hall, if I hear a bouncing ball, I'm looking in, and there they were working out, and that was my first insight into seeing how pro players put the work in to get better. And of course, I'd pop my head in and speak to them and get to know them. And eventually, if we didn't have lectures, there was 2 or 3 of us that would go and work out with them, just shoot and what have you. And, Jimmy, even to this day, people will still say he was one of the best Americans to ever play in our league. So that was incredible. But again, it got me a little hook into the sort of the world of National League and what was going on at that time.
How would you describe the culture of basketball and around basketball at that point? Like, was there, as a spectator sport, were there a lot of people showing up to watch these National Basketball League games? Was it getting mainstream press coverage? From a cultural standpoint, where did basketball stand?
I wasn't aware so much of that at that time. I think, if I remember rightly, I used to go mainly to Sobel because it was easy on the tube, and also to the Central YMCA in Tottenham Court Road, because that was another easy tube ride for me. And well, they were known as the Central Y back in those days, and the coach was Malcolm Chamberlain. I remember there were some awesome Americans played on that team. Alan Bunting, a guy called Bobby Cooper, who was probably one of the best dunkers ever. And I've watched all the dunk contests from the NBA over 30 years, and this guy could have won a few of them. He was incredible. There was the Akers brothers, Nigel and Adrian, I remember. And the crowds, it's difficult to gauge because it wasn't a very big facility, but I remember there was a balcony, and that was always packed. So ballpark, maybe between 500 and 1,000. That's kind of hedging my bets. At Sobel, maybe more in those days. I remember, being kind of wowed by the crowd because that was my first experience of going to see, if you like, proper games with a crowd. And again, I wasn't so much aware of the culture in terms of press, media coverage or anything like that until, again, I don't know how I stumbled into this situation, but there was a team playing in Division 2 at that time called Camden and Hempstead. Now, people might know some names from there. Bob Mackay was playing for them. Vince, he was known as Razak in those days.
Yeah.
Then he became Macaulay Razak. Now he's Macaulay. Vince was on that team. I'm trying to remember some other names. Charlie Bannerman was on that team. Anyway, they asked me to help them out with their PR. And only then was I kind of in that world where I was contacting local newspapers and stuff, and they were covering it like you get the whole of the back page.
Really?
I remember, what was the name of the... I can't remember the name of the newspaper, but...
They were willing to be involved in covering
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
And I remember even to this day, I think they put a colour picture sometimes of action shots from our game.
Really?
So that was all, again, around about this same time for me. So I was kind of still, this would be towards my final year at college, maybe the first year out, when I also got involved in a local league team called the Greenford Cardinals. And that was in the Middlesex League. And again, we had a pretty good team. We were always near the top. In fact, we won it a couple of times. And we would play in that league and also, I believe, the Capital League at that time. So again, lots of travel around London, getting to know everybody. Everybody got to know me, which was important later on for me when I wanted to forge a career in coaching. And again, it was a local league club, but we had big aspirations. And we started doing things the right way. And by that time, they realised that I, probably could be a coach for them, and they asked me to be the head coach. And I was also doing a bit of PR for them as well. So again, the interaction with media, trying to go out and get sponsors, literally on foot, knocking on shopkeepers' doors and stuff.
Did you have much success getting sponsorship?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think partly because it hadn't been tried before.
Right.
Basketball, what's that? The old cliche, especially back in those days. And suddenly you go into a sports shop, for example. One, they probably never had a guy come in to ask for sponsorship or advertising. And two, they wanted to know about basketball. So sometimes it was almost an easy sell. And we managed, even as a local league team, we managed to get a fair bit of support in terms of equipment sometimes, a little bit of cash. Yeah. And so again, that gave me a little insight into that side of the sport.
So at what point did you get involved with Crystal Palace? I thought that your first job was with Crystal Palace juniors, but obviously not.
No, what happened, again, this is all down to links and networking and contact. As I said to you, the link between the two clubs, college and Palace, had already been formed, almost before I got there. But anyway, when I got there, I suddenly realised, right, these guys, this is the number one team in the country. We've got a little bit of, I've already met a couple of the players. We had a couple of guys on our college team who were either aspiring to make their team or had already made it. One guy in particular, again, some viewers will remember this guy's name, Dave Fitzsimons, who was actually an Irish international. So anyway, I left college, and one of the guys that was left on our team, by the way, I got a teaching job as a PE teacher in West London.
Okay.
So again, I was still all around the London area. And one of the guys who was left at college was Richard Rudd, who, again, people would know. He was a Crystal Palace player, but was still, I think he was 2 years below me in college. So we still had the links, and my Greenford Cardinals club would come and scrimmage the college team. We had lots of links. There was an overlap because, again, one or two of the college players wanted to play more basketball, so they come to play for us in the league. I said to Richard one day, I said, Rich, you've got to get me an introduction into the folks at Crystal Palace because I want to coach there.
Had you made the decision at this point that you want to be a professional coach?
Yes, because I've been I started to coach Greenford Cardinals, and my playing, even though I was still playing whenever I could, and I love to play even to this day. In fact, just a few months ago, my ex-teammates from the Greenford Cardinals played in a veterans tournament over in Ireland. So we're all 60-somethings, and we obviously had to get together over the summer to get some scrimmage time in. So awesome. I was there. It was great. We had a blast. But because I was now coaching at the Cardinals, and you remember me saying that the London area basketball was a really good level. So I'm like, yeah, this is what I want to do, but I'm not doing it at a local league. I want to get to the big time. Crystal Palace was the number one team. I figured, yeah, it's a 40-minute drive. That's where I want to be. So I said to Richard, get me an intro. So this was the summer of 81.
Okay.
He says, fine, come on down. I get introduced to Terry Doherty, who is part owner, general manager, and David Last. And I literally, I remember to this day, I didn't ask them. I said to them, I'm going to be your assistant coach next season. And they didn't, kick me out the door. They said, oh, okay. And that's how I started. And so there I was in the pre-season of 81, and I was the assistant to Bill Sweek, who was the original head coach, and Danny Palmer, who was the assistant coach. And I was the second assistant. And that's how I started.
So, Crystal Palace at that time, let's talk about it as a club. In that era, obviously it was the club.
Yeah.
What was well, it'd be interesting actually to ask what separated Crystal Palace? Why was Crystal Palace the club?
That's a good question. And I don't know. I guess, as is usual with basketball, they were lucky enough to have some of the best players. Now, London basketball, and of course the folks in Birmingham and Manchester are going to kill me for this. London basketball in the 80s, probably into the 90s, was the hotbed. There was probably more people playing, although Manchester eventually, thanks to the efforts of people like Joe Forber, they had massive participation. But they weren't able, for some reason, to produce the best players as we were down in London. So I guess that may have been part of the reason. Also, and I'd never really thought about this as to why they were the best, or I could say we by that point, I was there. Maybe David and Terry had a vision, and they were able to get obviously two of the best Americans, and then two more of the best Americans, because Alton Bird came along when I was there. Again, one of the best American players to ever play here. And they also got in early on the what we used to call the dual nationals. In other words, guys with British passports. And we had a couple of those guys early on, whereas other teams didn't.
Right.
So maybe that was it. I don't know. It's a good question.
And you talk about London being a hotbed of talent and producing players. Like, you know, who were the clubs that were producing the junior talent that were going on to sort of professional careers and stuff?
Well, certainly.
And who were the coaches as well, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. In my early days there, so, you know, I came in as the assistant coach to the men's team, as I told you. And by the way, Bill Sweet left before the season began to take a job in France, and Danny became the default head coach, if you like.
And you became first assistant.
And I became the first assistant. And then later on, we were joined by, God rest his soul, Jimmy Rogers. So we can get into that part of the story later. And the following year, I became the assistant coach also to the junior team at Crystal Palace under Roy Packham, who's my good friend till this day and a mentor of mine. Now, so to answer your question, obviously Roy was producing, you know, just a conveyor belt of talent from Crystal Palace. Hump Flong over in East London. The folks over at Avenue, which I believe were in, I want to say North or North East London. I can't remember what Leighton.
Okay.
I think is where their home base was. Lenny Hoy was the guy back then who was one of the drivers there. And North London College, the North London Club, they played at the college. A little bit, guys were coming out of there. And then there was some schools. Jack Singer over at Clissold Park School, who I think was responsible for the Baker twins. You know, Andrew Bailey came out of that area as well. Not sure if he went to Clissold Park. I think he did. And, you know, there was a couple of other schools dotted around. But South London, East London, to a lesser extent North London, and then to a lesser extent still West London. It was in that order of, if you like, talent production. And
for you personally, you never ended up getting focused on the juniors, on wanting to coach the juniors. Like, why is that? You know, something that people say to me is that they always felt that it's a shame that you didn't get involved with the juniors because you could have offered so much in terms of developing players. But it was very much a case of you wanted to be a professional coach. You wanted to coach professional senior men.
Yeah.
Why was that?
You're absolutely right. And people all through my career, when I had gaps in my career, when I got fired, couldn't get another job, it's another story we'll get to, I suppose. People always said, oh, you know, go back and coach juniors. You know, you're a great teacher of the game. You have a good affinity with kids, blah, blah, blah. Of course, as an ex-teacher, maybe that was part of it. Although I got out of the teaching game, thank God, when I did. That was never going to be my career path. I always wanted to be a coach at the senior men's level, as you've alluded to. And whilst I agree with those people's description, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and still do to this day, interacting on the court with kids, because I know I can produce players and develop them, it never really turned me on as much as being at the big time of professional basketball. So consequently, I was working a parallel career because I still did a lot of stuff for kids. Obviously, in the teaching in West London, I built up basketball in my school, which had zero basketball. You know, that changed after 1 week of me being the PE teacher. And of course, then we went on and do great things. And I used to run camps and clinics throughout half terms and all the vacations. So, you know, massive involvement, which went on actually throughout my career. But it was always secondary to me wanting to be and eventually being a head coach at the pro senior men's level. And one of the things that I guess I'm one of those guys that I'm 100% committed to everything I do, and I will never let, once I've committed, I won't let either those people down or that situation down. Kids throughout even at school teams, you'd run a practice and there'd be 4 kids there. Because they got, the other 7 or 8 have got a myriad of excuses, all probably legit, but there's my practice decimated. It's driving me nuts. And this would happen with all junior teams. So I'm like, nah, I'm not having this. Whereas the pros, they're paid to, it's their job,
different
they're going to be
accountability,
there.
Isn't it?
They're going to be there, which means their commitment is akin to mine. And that's probably the answer to your question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So you got involved with Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
Became first assistant. Kind of what happened from there?
Right. Obviously, we still had a bunch of success in those. I was there 4 years, and the ability to be on the floor and exposed to that level of professionalism, even as a young assistant coach, working my way up. I didn't really know too much at that time about coaching, even though I'd done a bit. And I was obviously teaching as well, which is, teaching is coaching, coaching is teaching. I always say that. But nevertheless, it's in the guise of a PE teacher at a school. It's not like now where you've got academies, guys are full-time basketball coaches. That never happened. So that experience for me was the sort of touch paper to making me want everything and more. Consequently, I went to Danny Palmer and I said to sitting down, just shooting the breeze, coaching talk. But I said, Danny, I'd love it if you could give me a bit more responsibility at practice. He again, different coaches have different way of doing things, and I've mentored and appraised so many coaches over the years at all levels, and you see some coaches and they don't use their assistants at practice. The guys are just there, they showed up 2 hours and they've done this for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So immediately, even at a young age, I thought, A, I didn't want to be that guy, and B, when I was a head coach, I wasn't going to have my assistants work like that. They were going to be working as coaches. So I went to Danny and asked him for more responsibility. And to his credit, and I thank him to this day, because that helped me immensely, because you were able to go there and make the mistakes and learn from them and then go and seek knowledge. And he gave me every night, a few drills to do, or I'd take the big guys down one end and, Big Joe White, again, rest in peace. He was one of my projects, if you like. And I'd be working on the floor and becoming more and more involved. So that was fantastic for me. It also got me known a little bit more, because what would happen then, as you went around the league to play games and everything, and guys would kind of get to know who you were and what you were doing. And they'd obviously ask you, how do you run your practices? And so you'd share this information. Also, we were in Europe at that time. We played a couple of seasons in Europe. And I'll never forget this one time. Danny got thrown out of a game. I forget what... it was a French team. I'm up, and I'm like, I've never done any head coaching job at that level. And so, talk about a baptism of fire. But to his credit, what he would do then was, maybe I shouldn't say this, but we were so dominant in some of the games, if we knew we were going to win a game by like 30 or 40, he'd let me coach. And Jimmy, by the way, he did it with Jimmy as well. He'd let us be the head coach on the team sheet for the night. So that was great.
Yeah.
And it was intimidating, because, I'm coaching Alton Bird and Bob Romer, Dan Lloyd, Pete Jeremich, these guys, Paul Stimson. And to their credit, once Danny said, your head coach tonight is going to be either Mark or Jimmy.
And you were still a relatively young guy at this point.
I was younger than some of my players.
Yeah.
I
mean,
was in my early to mid-20s.
Yeah, that's a challenging thing, I think.
Yeah.
When I was in a management position at a job where I had a lot of staff that were older than me, and I was just like, I don't feel right about it. It was definitely a mental challenge.
What it did, it again further reinforced the fact that I want this and I can do it.
Yeah.
And also at that time was this fantastic. You probably heard, through. I know you've done a lot of research, through the time you've been running Hoopsfix. And I've always told you you've done a great job.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. The WICB tournament, the Phillips tournament, which is a huge deal in this country. People talk about it to this day, and that was again a big eye opener, not only from the point of view of the standard of teams that came along to play, but also for me because it got me a whole load of contacts, coaching contacts, globally, which I then pursued to my advantage and for my own ends. So again, that was another part of my story. Which
for people that haven't heard of WICB, give us a breakdown of kind of what it was and why it is still being talked about to this day.
It was way ahead of its time, and the only one of its kind in the world. And it was the brainchild of David Last. He managed to secure a sponsorship from Philips Electronics, and it was big money at that time.
Give me a figure.
Well, obviously, I ended up being on the management team for the WICB, and so, I had a lot of insights. We're talking about, in the late 70s, early 80s, way into six figures as a sponsorship deal. Now, I don't know what that would equate to today, but easily 7 figures.
Wow.
I mean, how else was he able to fly in with all expenses paid, Maccabi, athletes in action from the States, etc., a Brazilian team, men and women. By the way, WICB, World Invitation Club Basketball Championships. So it was literally that. Men's, women's, junior men. They'd all come.
And everyone would be paid for. Like it would be the tournament that pays to bring in all the
top
clubs.
Teams would all get paid for. The quote lesser teams would have to pay in the latter stages.
Yeah.
In the early stages, he was, because there weren't as many teams, he was able to let, like one of the local teams. I remember Bracknell, for example, playing in it. They were just down the road. They'd come for free to make up numbers or whatever.
So how many teams were in it?
Well, in the early days, I think he had about 6 or 8, and then it morphed into 10, 12.
And every club would bring males, females, and juniors.
Right, except when it started to get real big and the TV coverage, we were on BBC, just like it was normal. That was one of their Christmas, New Year fixtures.
Sold out every year?
Maxed out. In fact, they were almost literally hanging off the rafters, and I've got a story about that if you want to know.
Yeah, go for it.
It's a bit of a cliche. Oh, they're hanging off the rafters. Well, they literally were in the cricket school, which was the downstairs gym at Crystal Palace, which was literally a cricket school. They had nets, the old cricket nets.
Yeah.
But they turned it into a basketball court because we needed so many courts for this tournament, and it was a low-hanging gym. Because, they didn't use it for basketball, so the ceiling was low. And we played, the junior Crystal Palace team, played the Maccabi junior team, which were, if they had the EuroLeague junior championships like they have now in those days, they'd be, one of the top 2 or 3 teams.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. We beat them. And they were, the place was packed. Now, it wasn't a gym for spectators, so literally you'd go wherever you could get a place to stand, and we had kids literally hanging from beams and cross things for the cricket nets on the rafters of the ceiling. It was ridiculous.
So how many years did it run for?
I'm a bit blurred on this because it ran definitely for 6 years.
Okay.
Now, whether it went on a couple of years and I wasn't involved, because after I left Crystal Palace in 85, I want to say, 84, I then maintained my contact because, here we go, we're sort of getting into other parts of, I know you want to ask me about it later, I started running a coaches clinic at the WICB tournament in the last couple of years I was involved. And then when I left, David Last wanted to keep me involved. So I got involved, as I said to you, on the management team. So I continued to run I came back. I think I was on my other two teams now at Brunel Uxbridge and then Bracknell. But I come back to run the coaches clinic. And what we used to do was use the coaches off the visiting teams. And some of them were high-powered coaches. I mean, when you've got Dan Peterson coaching the Milan team, he's a legend of Italian basketball, won multiple championships. When you've got him in your building, why not use him, in our little room to run our coaches clinic? So, we got the guys in there and, again, that got me started, if you like, on the whole idea of the Coaches Association and stuff like that. So it definitely ran for that amount of time and, was a huge gathering point. You've probably heard this from others, for the whole of British basketball. People would come from everywhere and gather. And it was a fantastic time for referees. I'm sure if you speak to some of the refs today, they'll tell you what a great time they had, because they were again exposed to high-level basketball and they were on the floor doing it, and they were able to interact with all the coaches and everything, and we had a massive party. There were some legendary stories from those. I'm sure other people could tell you more. But it was a 4-day gig between Boxing Day and New Year's Day, kind of what we used to call dead time. People were, around. There was a lot of school teachers involved in the game of basketball at that time. They were all off at that time. People were kind of, there weren't any National League games. They were wondering what to do. And David, to his credit, saw that as a perfect time to run this. And of course, teams around the world, their leagues were down as well at that time. Why not go to London, which was a draw in itself, for this great tournament, which had some unbelievable teams for you to compete against. So it wasn't, just cupcake teams.
Yeah.
Teams wanted to come and play.
So from a business standpoint, obviously you've got Phillips putting in a bunch of money. It's on the BBC and stuff. Was it a profitable enterprise for the owners? Like, can you kind of give us some insight? Obviously, I'm assuming that's the motivation for doing it, right? In terms of money that's passing through the gate, and whether it's, I don't know, whether merchandise was, I don't know. Tell me, like the streams, like how did it all work?
Yeah, well, again, there was David was a shrewd businessman. I mean, he was an accountant by profession, and he was able to monetize this thing big time. As I said, eventually, the first couple of years, I guess, like any of these things, you're probably going to struggle a little bit. But how he was able to fly these teams in, all expenses paid, that tells you there must have been good profits. And the concession stands were there selling merchandise. And again, think about it, there wasn't very many places where you could buy basketball gear. So that, again, was a place where people knew, if you go to the Phillips, as we used to call it, then they stopped their sponsorship, it just became the WICB. You could buy this, that, and the next thing in between games. And there was, food stalls and stuff like that, which I guess all fed into the revenue.
Do you think a concept like that could work today?
Pardon?
Do you think a concept like that could work today? Like if someone was to come and try and do the same thing now?
I don't see why not, although I guess the costs...
Yeah, you need big money up front, right?
Would be hugely restrictive. You need the big money up front.
Do you think people would come out, like, to watch? Because I feel like culturally it's like... I mean, that's when I look back at the history of the game, it's always fascinating. The stands are always full, and then I think back in recent years, aside from the NBA, which is the NBA, when it comes to London, when the EuroLeague came here to do the Final Four in 2012, they originally had a 2-year deal and they dropped it to 1 in large part because it was just a disaster for them in terms of 1, getting bums on seats, but 2, actually getting media coverage from the national press. Right. Why do you think if it like that has changed? Like, what has changed?
I think, and you've probably heard this from others, the direction from the top the powers that be, the governing body, call it what you like, the influencers, was never there. I mean, in my 35 plus years, from having seen the halcyon days and being involved with the first ever Channel 4 live TV game, which was meant for many the watershed of, now the sport is, this is the moment, exactly. But unfortunately, if there's only ever one big moment in a lifespan of something like that, we've probably had about 3 or 4. I keep hearing this is the moment, and it's never really happened. And people like me, jaded veterans, who were in it at the start and who saw BBC's coverage. I've even got footage of me on the BBC because they came and filmed my team talk to my team at the WICB. So they had this. There was a buzz. They were excited to have it, and basketball, i.e., the governance, never seized properly on these opportunities. Now, I'm not a PR guy or a marketing guy. So what I mean by that, in a way, I don't really know how to articulate. What does it mean to have seized the opportunities? I don't know. But all I do know is we didn't do it as a sport. And we missed various opportunities to make a big bang in the media. And I remember I was involved, obviously became involved later on with England basketball and London basketball, mainly on the coaching committees. But that afforded me to go to various conferences as basketball's representative. And I remember going to an IOC conference. So we've got all the Olympic sports represented. And I'm talking to various people. And we're at a table having lunch. And I've got the head of volleyball, UK volleyball, sitting there, the head of netball there, hockey, and they know I'm from basketball. And I remember to this day, because we're talking about this particular topic, they said to me, because we were on TV at that time every week, they said we would kill to be in your shoes, i.e. basketball shoes. How can we, because they were all clambering for TV coverage, as was squash, by the way. Weirdly, I got involved with that a little bit. And they too would say to me, because of course squash is not a made-for-TV game, whereas volleyball, netball thought they were, and it's like, why are you guys suddenly on there with all this fantastic opportunity? But then, the following year, when we blew it with Channel 4, I went to a similar conference, and they're like, how come you guys blew it? And I'm like, here we go.
Well, what happened with Channel 4 in the end? Why did it end?
Well, I think this is my knowledge of the situation.
I know nothing, so...
Right, well, by the way, I was involved in the first ever game, and there's a little...
There's the game winner. There was a game winner in that game, right?
Well, yeah, and then it went to overtime.
Okay.
There's a little backstory to that,
right,
which you might be interested in. But, you can ask me if you want.
Yeah.
But the Channel 4 deal, from what I know...
just to give people context, the Channel 4 deal was the first time that basketball in this country had a regular broadcasting deal. It was on TV every week. Every week, one live game. They sometimes covered the whole game, but always covered the second half live. And was it prime time?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in a sort of evening slot.
And was it a broadcasting deal in terms of Channel 4 putting in substantial money into the game as part of the deal? They were paying for the rights?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not like
it was
happened in subsequent years where we were paying TV companies to put us on. I've never understood that.
Yeah.
You're more savvy media than I am, but how does that work? But anyway, you asked me
what happened. Yeah, how did you blow it?
From what I understand at the time, they were happy with the product in the first year for obvious reasons. But then they were trying to negotiate to cover all the teams in the league.
Okay.
And the governing body was saying, listen, you really don't want to cover like the bottom two teams. It's going to be terrible for the product, blah, blah, blah. And from what I understand, there was a bit of a back and forth and they couldn't resolve it. and they pulled out.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that left when that happened, that left basketball without a TV deal at all. Did they go to someone else?
No, it left them without a TV deal.
Oh wow.
And then came this, I'm not sure of the chronology, that there was I forget the name of it. It was an ITV.
NTL. The one that went bust. That's the big one.
That was it.
Yeah, but that was when they were making the switch from Sky.
Okay.
That was early 2000s.
I didn't know which came first, the Sky deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it must have gone to Sky a few years later.
Right.
But they were still trying to negotiate with BBC to have at least the main games on. Cup final, Wembley playoffs. It used to be at Wembley in those days. And, you know, they were hustling to try and do that. And I believe they did get a little bit of coverage. But the Channel 4 thing was awesome because it was the weekly coverage. We had our own show, our own slot, and we were starting to build a brand.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody knew because there was only 4 channels.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everybody kind of knew it was there. And as I say, I got these questions by these other sports. I think that was my one of my final 1 or 2 years of teaching at school in West London. And, you know, of course, when we'd been on TV, the following Monday, the kids would be all over you. Oh, sir, I saw you on TV. And so, yeah, the buzz was there.
Yeah.
And like you say, that was the moment, and we blew it. And then, as I say, over the subsequent 20, 25 years that I can attest to, there's been loads of these moments that we've blown.
Yeah, yeah. So, Crystal Palace, you're out for 4 years.
Yeah.
Why did you end up leaving?
Well, basically, I had an opportunity to be a head coach and run my own team.
Right.
So, of course,
makes sense.
Well, you pay your dues as an assistant, and this is, something that now wearing my coach development and coach education hat, and I know you've spoken to my good friend and brother from another mother, Tony Garbolotto, about this similar things, and he's of the same vision and has the same thoughts as me. Whereas these days, guys are being, well, I say these days, over the last, in my observation, 10, 15 years, guys who are so-called head coaches in and around our game haven't paid their dues. You know, I'm not saying there aren't different paths of making it, but from what I know coming up, and all the people who are my contacts, a lot of college coaches in the States, those were, where I built up a lot of contacts back in the day. You were an assistant or coached at a lesser level, hence my local league stuff, college stuff. Then you coached as a head coach at a slightly lower level. I became the head coach of the juniors at Crystal Palace when Roy Packham left. Then you become a head coach at the big time if you can get a break. So that was how you paid your dues and came up. Now, that took what? We don't know. For some folks, it might take 5, 6, 7 years. Others, it might be 10. There's guys who are sitting on NBA benches who have been assistants forever. And maybe they're lifers as assistant. A good friend of mine, Ron Adams, who's the assistant coach at the Golden State Warriors, he doesn't want to be a head coach. I've known Ron for 32 years. He's been in the league for nearly that amount of time. He was a college coach before. You probably know, his name comes up every year when head coaches' jobs in the NBA come up. He doesn't want to do it. So everybody's got a different path, but you've got to pay your dues. Otherwise, how do you learn? How do you know what you're doing? So I got my break at a Division 2 team. There wasn't the BBL at that time. There was NBL Division 1, which was the equivalent of the BBL, then D2. Brunel Uxbridge. And they played out of the Brunel University. And they were in D2, and I became their head coach.
Was that a full-time paid gig?
No.
I was still teaching.
I was still teaching.
Okay.
We had pretty good year. We won the cup, the national cup as it was back then.
And was it the university team?
No, it was part funded by the university, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I had maybe one player from the student body.
Okay.
Yeah, but we had 2 Americans, and again, I was able by that time.
That were getting paid.
Was I getting paid?
The Americans getting paid.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They were pros, and we put them up in accommodation, the usual gig.
But how even at Division 2, like obviously for me, I look at the game now. It's like so you got 2 Americans getting paid. Players like basically playing professionally in the second division before the BBL even existed. Obviously, you had the NBL as the equivalent.
Yeah.
Who was funding that? How was that being funded? Was it just the owner of the club? Was it commercial revenues from tickets being sold to games? Like, how did the financial structure work?
Sponsorship,
right?
And probably a little bit of individual money. The guy that owned the team at that point, well, it was part owned by the director of sport at the university, which gave us the little bit of, I presume they got the court for free or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of deal. And then another guy called John Kirkland, who was the kind of part owner / GM.
Okay.
He wasn't a rich man, so I don't know what was going on at that time. All I know is I was able to have 2 Americans, a couple of guys who were on expenses, who I brought in as, kind of next level players.
Yeah.
We had a pretty good team. I was just on expenses at that time, literally travelling expenses, but I lived fairly local, so it was great.
Yeah.
And as I say, we actually won the league and got promoted. And
which is going into the top league in the country.
To my horror, they had no ambitions. And they didn't want to go up because they thought it was a step too far in terms of finance and everything that the going into the top league would bring. And I'm like, you can't be serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened? Did you stay or did you leave?
No, I didn't stay. And because
that was your break. That's what you wanted the whole time, is to be in the top league at the pro level, and then they're just not doing it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so.
Don't move too far from the mic. Just reminding you. Yeah.
I couldn't quite reconcile that because I'm like, okay, we've got a pretty good team here. We've just got promoted.
Yeah.
Surely we want bigger and better things.
Yeah.
And this is where I get a little bit blurred with the dates.
Yeah.
Because let me just.
So it must have been around this time because the BBL was set up in '86, right? So if you left Crystal Palace in '84,
yeah,
that would have been '84, '85 season.
Let's have a look.
So
here.
It must have been around that time.
It was around that time, and it was being spoken about because the National League was getting better, if you like.
Yeah.
They'd had a little bit of TV and what have you, and there was some owners of teams in particular who, and of course, the league was run by the EBBA, which always used to drive me mad, that acronym, because basketball is one word.
Yeah.
It's not 2 words. So that's how amateur they were at that time. And of course, they were wanting, if you like, on PR, marketing, and that sort of thing. So the owners were like, we got to break away and do our own thing because you guys aren't promoting the league, the team, and the potential of the game.
I believe it was also something to do. Do you know what? I have to send you, and I spoke about this on an episode the other day. There's a guy who's been working on his master's dissertation about basketball funding, all the way from the inception of the National League through to the present day, and sort of the state of basketball in England. And it is the best piece of research I've read around basketball in this country in terms of well-researched, interviewed a lot of people, spoken to a lot of people, and it's given me so much context on things I have no idea about, which I have to send you to read because I think you'll find it interesting. But one of the things he talks about is the formation of the BBL. Okay. And he spoke about there was actually discontent about the revenue split on, I can't remember, and he speaks about the sort of what the numbers were and the percentages and stuff, but ultimately the clubs felt like they were getting a raw deal from the federation was getting a lot for nothing.
Yes.
So they was like, well, let's just do our own thing. So yeah.
Well, of course, when I said I wouldn't mention the serendipity word again, but I did mention a guy's name, Brian Naismith.
Yeah.
And I'll come to him because You've now brought up the formation of the BBL, and he was heavily involved, and therefore got me involved, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I've just had a quick look at the chronology, And when I left Brunel, it was then that I got approached by Jimmy Rogers to come and be the first head coach of this new team that they were starting in Brixton. And it was with this social enterprise type of deal, new era.
Yeah.
And this was 1985.
Right.
So Jimmy obviously had known me from Crystal Palace, and because I made quite a few references of the whole London area linkage that we all seemed to enjoy and have at that time, everybody knew who I was, I knew everybody. So there was an affinity there already, and I think Jimmy had seen, and obviously we might have even played his previous teams. I mean, he was running some local league teams or whatever. So I'm sure we came into contact in that previous year when I had left Palace, he had left Palace, I was coaching at Brunel. So we had the contact, and he kind of knew, you did a good job there, whatever, would you be interested? So I said, yeah, obviously, let me at it, because I had nothing. This was another head coach's position. It was really exciting because it was something completely new, and there was quite a lot of backing, both financially, which was important, obviously,
of course,
and also from the whole ethos that they were talking about with regards to the community and what they wanted to do. And I knew also that it was a hotbed for talent in Brixton itself and in the South London area per se. So I knew that we could get some players and probably end up doing well.
So that team, what division were they competing in?
Well, that must have been, they were going to be going in to the Division 2,
okay,
as it was. Yes, because it was a new team.
Yeah. And so how long? So at that point there wasn't a Division 3 or Division 4. It was just you had Division 2 and
then,
Division 1.
Yeah, then it was just regional stuff. I think.
Right.
Not even regional.
Local,
I think teams were just in these local leagues.
Yeah.
Which that's why they were so good.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the next level of player only could play at a local league team.
Yeah. I mean, there's stories like when obviously we've been working on this documentary over the summer, and there was a team in, I think it was Hackney, which obviously Joe White was involved with, and somebody said that it was the best team that never played National League, and it had like the Baker Twins and just all these names on it that were just like, how are all these people playing local league,
Right.
So yeah, it was definitely a different era. So how long did you stay with New Era?
Right. It's an interesting story. I don't want to go into some of the finer details, but I'll give you a good insight into what happened.
Yeah.
But of course, the first thing to say is that, one of the awesome things that happened was here comes the GOAT after his rookie season in the NBA,
of course,
Michael Jordan, to do that.
Did the thing in Brixton.
The launch of the Jordan footwear at the time, and the kind of launch of our new club.
Is that because I never knew why he was actually here.
Right,
this was 85, right? Because there is some grainy video on YouTube that exists of.
Oh yeah, well I've got the whole footage of the day.
Okay.
Vince McCauley.
Yeah.
He filmed it.
Right.
Obviously, as the head coach, I was responsible for running the clinic that was attached to this. It was 2 days actually of meet and greet, all the PR stuff that Nike would do, etc. But I mean, I could give you, that's another interview if you like. But yes, he came over. It was after his rookie year, and as you know, here come the red and black Air Jordan 1s, as they are now known, banned by the NBA. They wouldn't let him wear them. So I don't know how the link was forged, which is a bit remiss of me, because here come Nike and they want not only to sponsor our team with this gear, but to bring Michael Jordan himself over to promote it, launch it, run a little clinic with our club and do that whole PR thing. So we were blown away, obviously. But of course, we didn't really even know who Michael Jordan was. It's crazy. Even though, by the way, I was at the 1982 Final Four when he hit the shot to win North Carolina the title.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's another story again. But so he comes in. We have to run a clinic for kids during the day. So I'm responsible for that. There's a whole buzz around the place. It was awesome. Michael comes in. He's like hands on. He's working with all the kids. He's visiting. We had stations. He's visiting every station. It was fantastic. But the highlight of the day for me and us was that he scrimmages with my guys at our practice in the evening. It was awesome. You can imagine. And I can give you names of our players who were totally starstruck. But in fact, he brings members of his family and a couple of friends over, entourage if you like, along with him for the trip. And his brother Larry, who if you read the early books on Michael, he'd tell you Larry was a better player than he was. And I'm telling you, he was awesome in this scrimmage. So they both work out with our team. So here I am coaching Michael Jordan in drills in Brixton Rec in 1985.
Amazing.
Crazy. Anyway, the other part of the story, of course, we are the only club and the only outfit in the world who have this Jordan gear.
So was it a sponsorship of the club?
Of course it was. The only world, anywhere in the world at that time. They subsequently signed a few more people.
Yeah, of course.
In the months, I think, towards the end of that season. But we were the OG, as they would say. Now,
and you don't know how that link came about. Like why?
No,
why of all the clubs in the world? Why England? Why Brixton?
I don't know if Jimmy had anything directly to do with it. I doubt it, and that's not casting any aspersions at any. But I think Nike came to us because of the inner city thing and the new
era is all about social responsibility and impacting the community.
And it was it fit with their remit.
Right.
Their urban type of deal. They were just starting to get into that type of vibe at that time. But I'm telling you, if I knew then what I know now, I would have kept those shoes in boxes.
Yeah.
Because how much are they going for now on eBay and places like that? Tens of thousands. Because everybody got one pair of the black and red and one pair of the red, white and black.
Crazy.
And of course the team got all the gear, the uniforms, warm-up suits, the lot.
Yeah. Amazing.
It was amazing. Anyway, so the remainder of the story, unfortunately, and as I've learnt since about this phrase, in latter years, your sort of era of guys, perception is the new reality. You've heard that phrase.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, I wanted the reality to be the perception, and it wasn't. And cut a long short, I was made some promises which weren't kept, and there ended up being some disagreements, inevitably over money, and also though over playing staff, because I was promised 2 Americans and they didn't come.
Right.
So consequently, there was other things as well, but we had obviously great English players, but in order to compete, and again I wanted us to get to the next level, you definitely needed your Americans contingent because all the other teams had them. So that was a bit of a problem, and we, I forget what our record was. We had a winning record. It wasn't great at that time, but I ended up leaving midway through the season because we couldn't come to the agreement, and Jimmy brought in Alton Bird as a consultant / manager at that time, and Alton had his own ideas about the sort of the next route for this club. Anyway, it ended a little bit acrimoniously, and then I ended up leaving.
So where did you go?
Well, what happened next? So I'm in limbo again.
Yeah.
For the second time. My good friend at the time, Coach Dave Titmus, had taken over at Uxbridge. He obviously heard I got fired, or well, actually I left Brixton. And he said, "Oh, why don't you come along? You're doing nothing. We can't waste you. Come along and be my assistant," which is what I did. So I ended up being his assistant back at Uxbridge with his team at that time.
So then by that point, we must be at the point of the BBL launching, 86.
Right, here we go. So 86 comes along, and this is when I get my big break.
Okay.
And I'll bring that name back into the conversation like I told you I would. Brian Naismith is the owner, if you want to call him that, of what was then the Guildford Pirates, which became the Bracknell Tigers, which became the Thames Valley Tigers, and then moved to Guildford, and they're now no more. He had started, along with some other folks, to get this BBL going. So he'd had a series of meetings by then. There was stacks of paper already like this. And he approached me because we'd made the link way back when I was at school and had played his University of Surrey teams. And I kept in touch with him over the years. Plus, he had started the fledgling Basketball Coaches Association of England, BCAE. And of course, because I had already started to run these coaches clinics at the WICB, like I mentioned to you, I was in touch with Brian on matters coaching, matters basketball. So we had a little link. He said, I know what you can do. I want you to be the next head coach of my team. I'm like, this is what I've been waiting for. Because they're in the top league, I'm there. And was this a full-time job now where you could leave teaching? Still not? No, this is part-time. So I was still living in West London, teaching in Hounslow in West London.
Yeah.
And I was driving 5-8 times a week to and from Bracknell, and of course all the games all around the country.
So that first year of the BBL, how many teams were in
Well, it wasn't quite the BBL because that was still National League. And when I got to Bracknell, Brian, I was kind of, because I was the head coach, he kind of involved me, started to get me involved. And I went to some of these meetings where it was still being formulated and all the articles of association and all the legal stuff was being formulated at that time. And it was during the course of that season, that first season I was there, that they formulated it in the professional sense and in the legal sense, and then it got launched.
And that was so then by the next season was when it was launched.
86. Yeah.
Okay. What was that first year like? What were your memories of the first year? Your not only your own personal experiences, but like the league as a whole for people that weren't around to see it.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Like, I don't even know how many teams were involved that first year, and kind of what the state of play was.
Yeah. I want to say there was 10 teams.
Okay.
That seems to ring a bell.
Yeah.
And of course, it was. Now you've got teams all over the country, and the standard was really good. I had to up my game. Now by this time, I know you want to go on and talk about the sort of the coaching aspects.
Yeah, I would love to.
But what you've got to understand, when I mentioned the phrase "paying your dues," by that time I'd spent most of the preceding years going twice every year to the United States. I went to 9 Final Fours in a row, and by the way, I took, again, God rest his soul, Jimmy Rogers to his first ever Final Four, and he ended up going for the next 25.
Yeah.
I went to the next 11, so he beat me on that. But of course, along with obviously watching the games, there was the massive NABC, National Association of Basketball Coaches convention, which was the huge coaches clinic. So, of course, we're there every single minute of every clinic. Also, every summer, I'm working camps all around the United States. I'm building up a huge network of friends, coaches, and acquaintances around the game, some of whom are my friends to this very day. So, 30, 40 years worth of friendships forged from going over there learning and expanding my knowledge to be a better coach. That's my whole motivation. So by this time, I had built up quite a bit of knowledge, which was going to be expanded. Obviously, you never stop learning. But I'd already arrived at how I wanted to coach and how I wanted to coach the game and how I wanted to coach players and develop them. So I had some idea of what I was doing, even at that first stage of what you'd call the big time now. So the focus was on, because we were an okay team. We were middle of the pack in the first couple of years, and then, of course, got really good when John Knight came in to own the team, who was a multi-millionaire. Budget went up, get better players. The formula isn't that big of a deal to understand. It was great. The standard was pretty good. You obviously, the Manchester team now, Coventry as they were, which became Team Fiat. Then they moved to Birmingham. So there was a lot of good teams. Solent down on the south coast. Some strong teams around Sunderland.
I wanted to, speaking of the sort of the education side of things, and you've spoken about you wanted to just absorb knowledge all the time and stuff. Obviously nowadays there is the internet. It's very easy to find videos of clinics, so you don't have to go in person. Yeah. I'm sure there are probably numerous online courses and just all this stuff. There's so many opportunities for a young coach, if they want to seek that information. Obviously, back in those days, it was a little bit different. For any coaches, kind of aspiring coaches, was the only way of absorbing knowledge either going physically to these clinics, working camps, working underneath another coach where you've got to pay your dues, like kind of, if you were a young coach in those days coming up, like what was the sort of general formula for their own professional development, essentially?
Yeah. I mean, you've alluded to it there. That's a good description, because you had to, and what I used to do again around this time in those preceding years to get in this job. I'd already, as I say, been over the Final Four, started networking. I would go up to the head of the NABC. I remember his name to this day, Joe Van Sissen, and say, because there was so few international coaches attending these things.
You were funding out of your own back pocket, I assume.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Listen, I was lucky. I don't mind saying. Again, these things along your life's journey sometimes fall in your lap. My father worked on the airlines, so he had a lot of contacts in a lot of the other airlines. I used to get free tickets,
right?
Round trip tickets.
Amazing.
Now, I was on standby. That was the only negative, but I never got bumped. I think once I got bumped in the sort of 8 or 9 years that I'd gone biannually stateside. So it didn't really used to cost me anything.
Right.
Some hotel accommodation, food on the road in the States, and a rent a car.
Yeah.
And don't forget, I was a full-time teacher, so I had a salary, no problem.
Yeah.
But I was also able to go up to Joe and say, who I am, what have you. How can you help me over there in England? We got nothing. So, but he started sending me books, and I started getting some addresses of places in the States, because you couldn't get them here, that would sell technical coaching books. I started, paying for the postage, getting them sent over. So I started getting magazines, books, learning that way, and of course attending every clinic I could in the States. There weren't very many clinics here. There were a few. I remember going in the late 70s, early 80s. Hubie Brown came over here. Nobody knew who he was. Joe B. Hall, the legend Kentucky coach, came over here. Dean Smith. And invariably, they were in London, because that's where they were going to be, in some dark gym in the middle of town somewhere. And there'd be like 15 of us attending a clinic with these legends of the game. But you had to go if you were me and junkies like me. So you're right, you did all those things, you hustled, get information from wherever you could. I said to you, I made contacts through the WICB. One year there was a Belgian team. This is a quick one. The coaches on the Belgium team also happened to run their coaches association in Belgium. Boop, made the connection. We started to exchange information. They'd send me their monthly coaches newsletter. It was in Flemish. So I, through my teaching contacts, got somebody to translate it. And I'd in turn started to produce my own newsletter on and old teachers will remember this, we had a Roneo machine in school that you had to do it by hand like this, but I started to produce my own and I'd send it to Belgium. By the way, that was duplicated in various countries. I'm just giving you a quick example because you asked me how would you get better? How would you get your information, your technical knowledge? So yeah, I was hustling to get all this. Plus, you work under better coaches, which doesn't seem to happen anymore. These younger guys I see, and Tony G would say the same thing, they haven't paid their dues because they haven't done any of this. So how are you going to learn by looking at the YouTube and looking at a drill and saying, oh yeah, that looks good, let me take that? You don't know how to teach within the drill, which is another thing we might get into, I don't know. But if you're on the floor with a more senior coach, like I was with Danny Palmer, Roy Packham and others, I was very lucky, plus the guys I was being exposed to in the States when I worked camps. And I'll tell you, I'll drop this in there. And again, this was, just by accident, I got to a camp in Santa Barbara, Southern California, called Snow Valley Basketball Camp. At the time, it was one of the best teaching camps in the United States, acknowledged throughout the coaching fraternity as being that. And the owners of that camp, they're friends of mine to this day. It's been running for over 50 years. The coaches they would get on their staff were high school coaches and small college coaches. They were some of the best teachers in the United States, including big-time NCAA college coaches and NBA. And that's where I learned most of my basketball drills, philosophy, methodology, which I still use to this day. So that was some of the most valuable time I've ever spent and gave me 75% of my knowledge and acumen as a coach, which I brought back, obviously, and put on the floor here, whether it be with my pro teams, whether it be when I was running camps and clinics for kids, and eventually when I ran and tutored hundreds of coaching award courses and coaches camps, which I did with the BCA. So you're absolutely right in saying there's just no substitute for gaining that type of experience.
I did say to you before, one of the things I would love to talk about is the BCA and the Basketball Coach Association and kind of your early involvement in that. So, how did that first come about? What sort of year was it?
Right.
What was going on? What was the kind of backstory? Carry on talking, because I'm just going to check one of the cameras. Keep going.
Okay. Now, the backstory is, again, I'll refer you to Brian Naismith, as we've mentioned. And when I got to Bracknell, he got me involved with not only the team and the BBL, like I mentioned earlier, but with the Coaches Association, which he had already started. But it was small, he couldn't do it on his own, and I was all gung-ho to do something like that. So I got involved at that time, and as I said, it was known as the BCAE. And Brian, together with myself, started to really get going with it in terms of now producing what was a quarterly newsletter, which I used to do at the reprographics department of school. And we started getting coaches, because of course between us, we knew everybody and we knew coaches all around the country. So we started to say, look, we want to make this a real deal. Would you become a member? And in those days we asked them for some nominal payment, £5 or whatever, and we had T-shirts made up, and they get their quarterly newsletter for free, and we started running coaches clinics. So
and the federation wasn't doing anything.
Well, you say that they weren't really doing anything in terms of clinics and stuff. So I approached them, with Brian, and said, look, with your blessing, this is what we'd like to do. Can we go ahead and do it? We said, we'll involve you because you're the governing body, and we need we need to be affiliated in some way, and have your name on our publications. And if we run a clinic, we'll have you as the sort of partner, if you like. But we ended up running stuff. So I'll give you a quick example. In the early days of running clinics, we made an agreement with whatever they were called at that time, England Basketball, I'll call them. At the cup final and at the playoffs, we'd have a coaches clinic every year, and they were happy with that. So I would organise it. I'd get the speakers. We'd run it in one of the classrooms, whatever venue we were at, be it NEC at Birmingham. We actually had one of our cup finals, believe it or not, at the Royal Albert Hall. Did you know that?
Yeah.
So we ran a clinic there in one of the, I presume was maybe where the violinists practice. But yeah, so those were the early days of the BCA.
What sort of year are we talking about?
86.
86, okay.
Yeah. And then by, as the years went on, I just kept it going. Brian's involvement in the game kind of fizzled out. He sold the club to John Nike, and then his involvement started taking a real backseat. He'd come to the odd game. He was director of sport at the University of Surrey, so he was busy there. And because I kind of got the bit between my teeth with the coach education and development, by that time I was involved with the governing body as well on their coaching committee, and they saw me as kind of one of the main guys, if you like, to lead on stuff.
Yeah.
I'd already run some clinics. I was producing documents and these newsletters. So Brian basically left it to me, and I ran with it. And then we took off. We changed the name. I got John Collins involved at an early stage because he was, also not only interested in doing that stuff, but was already doing a little bit of it. And we then got some other guys involved along the way. Betty Cadona came in later, and some other people. And then it became, reasonably big in terms of we couldn't understand why we seemed to be the only country of the leading basketball nations without a proper coaches association. So that was one of the motivators for me. I'm like, I'm going to change this.
Yeah.
Because I was in touch with a lot of these guys. I knew the guy who ran the Italian Coaches Association. I knew the guy who ran the former Yugoslavian Coaches Association. And they're like, what are you guys doing? In the early days, it was, not much. And then I thought, you know what? Let me try and make this bigger. So I went out, tried to get some sponsorship to make things happen on a bigger scale. Our publication became a lot more sort of glossy. And of course, this was pre-internet. We eventually went online. And we started doing things a little bit bigger and better. And now I thought, right, our clinics, we need to attract some bigger name speakers to attract more people, which we eventually did. And, when you get the likes of Joan Plaza, who was coaching Real Madrid at the time, Sergio Scariolo, who was, is now the Spanish national team coach, and he's an assistant with the Toronto Raptors, which is weird to me, but, so we had some big names come through our clinic program, and consequently our clinics were starting to be really well attended. I mean, back in those days, to get 50 coaches to a coaches clinic anywhere in the country, and by the way, we'd run them all over the place. So we always try to get the sort of North, Midlands, South type of deal, because our northern friends would moan about having to come to London. So I thought, all right, I'll bring the clinics to you. So we'd always get that sort of program going. And Laszlo Nemeth, when he was the national team coach, he would be my travelling clinician. So I take him to Manchester, then we drive to Birmingham, and then we come and do one in London and maybe in Southampton. And, Laszlo would be on the road with me, and he'd be the featured clinician. But, we ended up having attendances of over 100 coaches wherever we were. And we took over the governing body's national conference, which they, by their articles, I think were mandated to do, along with the refereeing conference. So for a few years, we ran them side by side, which was interesting, because then the coaches could interact with the refs, which made for some very interesting lunchtime conversations and dinners. But it was great on a more serious note, because that helped promote and develop both important strands of our game. And then we got a great sponsorship by Nike. Richard Stokes was working for him at that time. He had a vested interest in being one of the top referees, not only in this country, but ended up being one of the top refs in Europe. So he helped us in all sorts of ways with a Nike sponsorship deal for the Coaches Association, which then helped us do all sorts of other things in terms of the promotion of the clinics and being able to, get bigger names, more of them. And of course, we could give freebies on the door, which attracted more coaches to come to our clinics. That's a bit of an overview.
What number did your membership peak at?
It peaked at about 250.
Okay, and there were people paying an annual fee to be a member?
This is a bit of a contentious issue, actually.
Right.
I was, along with John and one other person, we were kind of the three head honchos, if you like, of the association. We made it run. And John and I actually were responsible for the clinics and also for our annual summer residential coaches camp, which ran for 12 years. And we would offer the level 3 National Governing Body Coaching Award at that week. I mean, we used to have a blast. And the names that went through those camps, some of whom are coaching in predominant positions now, national team coaches, etc. Anyway, so we were running things, and we were obviously, it was costing us to run various things. And I was adamant that we should have membership for free, because coaches in our country traditionally weren't really paid. So you had all these great people around the country, activists, let's call them, who were doing great things for our game, and they were putting their own money in, especially with kids teams. And by the way, I paid my dues with that as well, having put money myself in, which you'll never recoup, but so what? Yeah. You do it for the love of the game, yeah. And to help kids. I ruined 3 cars, from transporting more players than should be in there, yeah, to games and practices. Coaches around the country have got these stories, war stories. The old timers like Joe Forber and Mike Burton, Humph, rest in peace. They all did that back in the day. But I thought, we're burdening coaches with, paying their dues to an association. What do we really give them? It wasn't like we were in Spain, who offered insurance to their coaches, plus places like Holland and France, where it was mandatory to be a member of the Coaches Association, because you couldn't get your coaching license to be a coach unless you were, and you had to attend 2 clinics a year mandatory. I tried to put this in our country, because I'm like, if Holland can do it and France can do it, why can't we? Plus, it would make the whole thing more professional. Our governing body didn't want to do it. Again, another story for you if you want later on. drove me nuts because I was trying to professionalise things, and I was, seeing this along the way. So that's why we broke away eventually from the governing body and as a coaches association. So many coaches towards when we did break away were saying to us, because they knew what the scene was in other countries as well. Oh, what you need the BCA to be our union and have all the ramifications that a union bring, a proper union. I'm like, is that really going to work here? We haven't really got we got like 10 professional coaches in the country, i.e. professional with a big P, being paid, and that's their job.
Yeah.
That's their salary to put bread on their table. So anyway, we took it to the committee, as you do in a great democracy, and it was passed that actually there should be a fee. So we ended up charging them a fee, £20, I think, and that's how we progressed. But I think a lot of people had a lot of good things to say about the BCA in those days, and then inevitably, I suppose, it kind of fizzled out a little bit.
I was going to ask that. Why did it stop? It sounds so positive,
This is where you and I, our paths first crossed a few years ago when we tried to re-resurrect it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I don't think that is completely dead.
No.
There's been more talk about it recently in recent weeks, but it's definitely something that even listening to you now and having this conversation, I'm like, there is no reason why coach association should not exist.
Agreed.
And it's something that should be there, something that that needs to be there.
Yeah.
But at that point, those conversations, it's one of the. There's so many projects that I have, juggling everything, and then obviously Lloyd was involved, and but there is talk now of, recently in recent weeks of trying to sort it out and actually get it done. Obviously I said I'd support on the digital side of things and digitising the tapes that you've got and all of that, because there's so much archive there. But it's definitely something that I feel.
Well, we were well respected in what we were doing, and as I say, we produced. The clinics were fantastic because that's coach education, and of course, in the ensuing years, the internet then kicked in, and the dissemination of information, was going to be inevitably more online. And you had the ability to get it from everywhere in the world. Our role, took on a slightly different thing. I think there was still a place for clinics, i.e., come along to a gym and listen to a guy who is big time and you might learn some things. But I don't know. As that progressed, we saw the numbers going down, and it was less viable because you have to rent a facility and pay folks to come along to speak, and it was like, this financially this isn't really working anymore.
How are you funding? Like, how are you flying in guys from overseas to come?
Well, we were able, as I said, when we had the Nike sponsorship, for example, they helped with things like that. Plus, we piggyback on a couple of things. I'll give you a quick example. We piggybacked, for example, on Jack Majewski's Future Stars tournament.
Right.
So he was getting some sponsorship. He had some finances available in the pot. And we ran some coaches clinics, which we, a couple of years, put under the guise of the national conference. So EB were happy that it was going ahead. Plus, I was able to manufacture a situation where, because it was at Jack's tournament, we were able to, he'd pay for a guy to come in.
Right, perfect.
So we were able to get a couple of speakers to come in and speak on our clinic. They'd be, I remember, I'll give you a quick anecdote. I know you like the stories. Sergio Scariolo was there one year with actually a guy called Neven Spahia, who is a big-time EuroLeague coach. He was also the assistant at the Atlanta Hawks for 2 or 3 years. Again, these are all guys I kept in touch with because my MO now. I latch on to these guys, and because they can help me along the way. So he came along, and it was the time of Wimbledon, because Jack's tournament would always run around that time, and he obviously wanted to go to the games of Wimbledon, and this was a perfect opportunity. So we killed like 4 birds with one stone, getting him over. And those were the types of things we just hustle to try and make things work well, as best you can. For what? For the benefit of coaches who wanted to come along to improve.
Yeah,
that was it. That's my sole purpose in life, with the BCA hat on.
Yeah,
and I think I achieved quite a lot of things, and a lot of people came through, as I say, our camps and clinics. Even if it was some, I was available as like an agony on as well. I'd say to coaches, younger guys or older guys, call me if you need any advice on anything. John Collins was the same, by the way.
Yeah.
And we'd get a few calls every now and again.
There's strength in having that network.
Yeah,
for
shoot
sure.
the breeze, help on a drill.
Yeah.
You're having a problem with a player. How do you deal with it, coach? This, that. Yeah.
I remember, when I first sort of came on the scene with Hoopsfix, I remember going on the BCA website, and you obviously had a lot of coach contributions for articles. People would send in their own thoughts around certain things.
Exactly.
And I used to find it interesting just to read. There's obviously a fair bit of ranty stuff as well, and complaints about various different things that were going on. What year did it finally wind down?
That's a good question. I think in the mid-2000s.
Yeah.
Maybe a little later.
Okay.
Yeah, 2000, I want to say, 2007, 8 maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know why that year's coming into my head. It's kind of vague, a little bit vague to me, that, but I could go back and find out. But and as I say, it started from again that just almost by accident. I happened to be in the right place at that time with Brian Naismith, and
it happened. I'm aware of time because I don't really want to go over 2 hours. We're at 1:45 at the moment.
Jeez.
That's why I said
time flies when you're having fun.
It flies. But yeah, there's obviously a few other bits that would be interesting for me to cover. Starting with kind of like, now you're completely checked out and you're not really involved with basketball, which clearly, from the conversation we've had over the last hour and 45 minutes, you're very passionate about it still, and you still love the game. But you're no longer involved. So why is that? Clearly, there's so much value that the game could have from you if you were still involved. Why aren't you?
Well, you asked me sort of back. We ended my little potted history at Bracknell when I was still a teacher.
Yeah.
Well, in 1986-7, it gave me the opportunity at Bracknell to become the full-time head coach / GM. And that's when I quit teaching and became a professional basketball coach as a career.
Dream achieved.
Pardon?
Dream achieved.
That was it.
Yeah.
So I achieved the goal right there. And of course, since then, I've never had another quote-unquote job. And I've been full-time ever since. So along the way, I've had several clubs, as you know, and some people watching and listening to this know. I've had some successes, some failures, and I've been fired or resigned from, unfortunately, I think about 3 different situations, which we could go over maybe in a part 2.
We'll definitely have to do a part 2.
Yeah, we have to do a part 2.
There's a lot of stuff we haven't covered. Yeah.
But suffice to say, even with all that going on, my love of the game, my passion for the game, and to quote a phrase that people use, being a lifer, has never diminished, and nor will it. It'll go to my grave. Now, I have still continued to be involved, even when I haven't had one of the so-called, big-time BBL professional jobs. For example, I was coaching an academy with John Collins up in Northamptonshire for a few years, so I did that. I've always been involved in coach education and development because that's one of my other loves, apart from being on the floor, coaching players and teams. And, you know, I sort of get goosebumps even today thinking about the number of coaches who I can see on sidelines at various parts of the country now who I've helped, basically. I don't want to say I'm their mentor or anything, but certainly helped, either through being their tutor on a course or mentoring them post-course or giving them an opportunity or guiding them in a certain way. There's a couple of coaches who have gone abroad to learn their craft, and I've helped them to do that, and they've come back and been successful coaches here and thanked me for that opportunity. So those things give me goosebumps till today, and I'm happy to have done that, and I still do it today. So even though I'm not coaching, and people have always who meet me and know me from old say, it's an absolute travesty and what have you. I'll leave that for others to comment on. All I know is this, that, and again I have to unfortunately go back to the governing body and the governance of our sport. They historically have not used, and I would say have even almost spat on, the expertise and knowledge that's available in the country if a person or certain individuals didn't fit in for whatever reason with the status quo or the zeitgeist at the time. And I'm one of those guys. How can you and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, how can you have a guy like me who's got a lot of knowledge and experience, proven, has an unbelievable passion for the game, unmatched and unrivaled. I'll go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country on that. And then, by the way, there's a lot of us with that sort of passion, who's still got a lot to give. Thank God I've got my health. I'm an old guy, but I can still get out there and demonstrate and, get rah-rah with the kids and everything, because I'm passionate. When I cross the lines, that's me. That's my domain. That's my church. That's my cathedral. How can you leave a guy like me untapped and unused? I'm willing to do anything and everything to help our game in this country. And boy, does it need help. And yet, nobody contacts you. And again, I know some old-timers in various countries in Europe and in the States, not so much in the States because their structure is just so vast and huge, and you got a million other coaches who can do things. But in some of the European countries, certainly some of the smaller ones, they recognise they need all the help they can get from their old-time guys, and they bring them in, they use them. You might not get the job, but they'll certainly have you consulting, for example, on one of the national teams. You hear this all the time in Spain and France and places like this. And yeah, I have to say to those guys, we're in England. That's my my refrain, and I get deflated like this every time I have to say it. They just don't do that here. They don't know to do that. And it really depresses me, Sam.
Have you tried to go to them?
Yes, with a whole bunch of ideas. And in fact, even as recent as yesterday, Tony G is my sort of protege. He won't mind me saying that. He considers me a mentor, and we speak all the time. And he is passionately involved about this area of our game as well. So we still talk, and it's that subject about ideas that either he's still going to the governing body with today in 2018, that I went to them with the same idea 25 years ago. It's flabbergasting to me that these ideas, whether they've come from me or somebody else, and I'm not unique, I'm not saying it's only me, there's been others who I could name, and the governing body don't want to know. And we can't understand why. I'll give you a quick example, and this is contemporary. They've produced yet another glossy document which I've seen regurgitated now about 5 times in the last 25 years. I'm sick and tired of these documents coming out that mean nothing. And yet, they try and implement them and nothing changes. Nothing gets better. The quality of coaching is still not as, let me just put it like this, not as good as it could and should be. The quality of players we produce is not as good as it could or should be. And what's happened with all your player pathway development plans and all these glossy brochures you produced along the way? They haven't contributed to making things any better. Yet, when I come with you with an example from, say, how the Australians did it, that we could replicate over here, and I'm willing to do it for you, and they don't even get back to you, I rest my case. Because nothing ever happens.
So let's say that you were given a position with Basketball England to be the head of coach development and improving the game in this country. I know this is obviously give us the brief overview because this could be a very long answer. Where would you start? Like, what do you see looking in that should be the priorities when you're talking about developing coaches? I feel like a lot of people I speak to, when they talk about the things that hold about the game, we obviously get a lot of the obvious stuff, but it seems like if we had a lot more higher quality coaches, it would go a long way in improving everything, because we then have a lot more better players, have a bigger talent pool, better clubs, and all that would lead to, then you've got more entertaining players that people want to go and watch. You're going to sell more tickets to games. It's like this whole thing. So coaching is obviously a massive part of it. So yeah, if you were given that position, where would you start? What would be your priorities? Where do you think, knowing the resource that England has, the struggles that England has with facilities and whatever else might be, what would your plan be?
The first thing I would say is that I'd find it very difficult to undertake that role within the auspices of the governing body, because you're already stymied by that structure of Sport England type, philosophy, structural, they're going to deliver things in a certain way. You have to use various, phrases which mean nothing. So that's a real problem for me at the outset. But because we're speaking hypothetically, Sam, let me just go on then to say that I knew from the age of about my early 20s, when I first started out, that the only way to improve players is to have great coaching. And so that's been my journey to try and help coaches, and we've discussed some of that today, because that was something that was told to me from people I looked up to, and I mentioned some of my contacts and mentors back in those days, a lot of them being American coaches, by the way, in America, not here, because they weren't around for me, except for somebody like Roy Packham. So you would have to improve the standard of coaching. And of course, to your question, now, how do you do that? Well, how long's a piece of string? And we're already out of time. Now, the problem is that the pathway, and we've already mentioned something about that pathway, doesn't really exist for a coach in this country. That's why, to my shame, actually I'll take that back straight away, I used to tell guys who come on my level 3 courses when I was tutoring them, if you want to improve, I mean really improve, and make coaching your thing, your profession, the love of your life, if you really want to do that, you've got to leave this country and do it abroad. And I used to tell them that. And you know what? There's been 3 guys over the years who must have written that down, gone away and believed it and done it. And they've thanked me for it after they've come back. I just mentioned that a few minutes ago about guys that did that. That's what I was pertaining to. So it breaks my heart to have to say that, because here's the deal. If you can't, in your particular area of the country, have a club that has a superior coach and or program that you can go along to, like I did at Crystal Palace, what are you going to do? You're not going to be exposed to that pathway of excellence. So that's a problem. That's the first thing. Secondly, time on the floor. The only way to improve your coaching is not to go on the internet now, and back in my day, read a book before internet. That won't make you a better coach. It'll help you gain knowledge, but you've got to go on the floor and do it. So that's what I used to say to guys who, unfortunately, there's more and more of them, and they're the younger millennials. I hate you guys. No, I'm only kidding. They talk a good game. That's my big phrase. I don't want to hear it. Show me what you got on the court. I'll tell you whether you can coach or not. I don't want to hear it in a thing like this, that you know how to defend the pick and roll 5 different ways. Can you teach it on the floor? That's my only judge and measure of you as a coach. What can you show me on the floor that you can do? Which of course pertains to players as well, by the way. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting into it. I don't want to get into it too far, but the last part of that, because you asked me in this hypothetical, and it is hypothetical, role for me, the standard of play in our leagues. And you've seen some of the recent scores, and this happens year after year, look at especially in girls basketball recently, if you're winning games at the weekend by 50, those players aren't getting any better. You have to have tough competition. That's why our junior teams at Crystal Palace, and I'm talking now way back again, Roy started this and I continued it. We played them against men's teams. Because there's no point playing a junior team and winning by 30. We had all this talent. How are we going to make them better? Let's play against tougher competition. Now, these other countries, let's take Spain as a quick example, they go every one of their National League games that those kids play, 14s through 18s, most of them are going to be tough games. Those guys are going to get better in a heartbeat. Plus, you've got proper coaches coaching them. I've meshed the two things together for you. So those would be the two main areas that I'd have to deal with. The second of which I can't do anything about.
Yeah,
we can't suddenly magic better competition for our junior leagues. So what do? I'll tell you, here's an obscure one for you. Jack Majewski, we already mentioned him. We call him Crazy Jack because he's a good guy, but
he's crazy.
he tried to take his kids to play abroad.
Yeah.
In a league to make them better. That's the first time I've ever heard of anybody trying to do that. But of course, he is Polish. So maybe he knows something we don't. It's a problem. Yeah. It's a problem. I don't know how to solve the second bit. The first bit, getting coaches to understand acquisition of knowledge, continuous professional development, but putting them on a pathway where they're not told by some incongruous committee at the governing body that you've made it and we want you to be our national team coach. Don't get me started on this little subject when they haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
So I flipped that around a little bit.
Basically setting up a system so that people have to put in the work. They've got to do their due, put in the hours before they get into any sort of position of responsibility.
But you've got to do it on the floor, Sam. Yeah. That's the difference.
Yeah.
You can't just suddenly talk a good game or come up with all the sound bites and the jargon and think you're a coach.
But then how do you actually, like you're saying that, so we're talking about the hypothetical situation, you're tasked with improving coaching.
Yeah.
You're saying that basically you need to increase their time on the floor to be able to improve. How do you do that?
It's a tough one. I'd make it mandatory. I don't know if it's still going because I've been out of the loop a little bit recently, but like I alluded to earlier, when I was in touch with all these other countries' federal coaching associations, I knew for a fact that some of these countries, it's mandatory to have a license to coach in their national leagues. You have to be a member of the Coach Association and you have to attend minimum 2 clinics.
So you're actually improving,
including their equivalent of our national conference. I tried to get this done here when Alan Richardson, so this is prior to Brian Aldred, who's the incumbent, I don't even know what they call him anymore. They're the guys in charge of supposedly coaching development in this country. I roll my eyes because, it's never happened. And I had this conversation with Alan. He's still around. Ask him. And he'll hopefully remember it. Make it mandatory. Oh, no, we can't do that in this country. So that's the first thing I'd do. Right, next, you've got a kind of captive audience now. Because you ain't coaching and I'm quality controlling you in some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
So that's at least a first step. And then I would physically go round and help people. On the floor, in their gym, in any part of the country. In fact, put that on your website that I'm available to do that. And I will do it to this day. My personal situation has changed a little bit where my time isn't so, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking from my heart now, as you can probably do. And Tony, get him on this because he'll tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
And you know, he's prepared in a way to do it as well. I mean, somehow we'd have to get paid. Let me just throw that one in as an aside. But you're asking me what I would do. Those are some of the things I would do. I'm not saying I'm, the English answer to John Wooden or Pat Riley or Greg Popovich. But I know what I can bring to the table along with folks like Tony G, John Collins, Dave Titmus, Bob Martin, and I could go down a list of what we would call more experienced coaches who have paid their dues, done it at a high level, got, if you want, I'm not into this myself, but if you want, got the trophies and accolades to prove it, and can help you. Can help you. And can help the game in this country. Bring us along. Bring us along and let's see what we can do to improve the standards. So, yeah, that's definitely something I would do.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. If we do have any aspiring coaches watching that want to reach out to you, what is the best way of them contacting you?
Give them my email address, Sam.
And what is your email address?
coachmwd@gmail.com.
Okay, we've got it on record. There it is. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've gone 2 hours and 5 minutes on the dot. Thank you so much for making the journey across to East London. And like you said, we'll definitely do a part 2 at some point in the future.
Thank you so much, Sam. And once again, I appreciate everything you do with your Hoopsfix. And, we as basketball needed somebody like you to come along to do that. And keep up the good work. And we'll see each other again.
Definitely. Thank you very much.